today we're doing what's probably going to be my longest video yet, the Assassin's Creed Extended Series Review. Assassin's Creed is a series I've played for quite a while, with quite a lot of ups and downs. It's a great source of history trotting, action-adventure. We're going to be looking at the Extended Series, which means everything that came out on console or VR. And we're going to be doing this ranked from worst to best. And we're going to start out with worst, AC Odyssey. But before we get into all this, I need to mention my demo for my new indie game. The demo for What Happens at Midnight, my action survival horror FPS, is available for free right now on Steam. You're sent to investigate the town at nightfall and quickly find out interdimensional forces are invading our world. Hop between worlds, meet strange characters, and survive cosmic horrors once you find out what happens after midnight. So we're going to start with Assassin's Creed Odyssey. First I'll say that I know a lot of people do like the Assassin's Creed RPG games, but they really don't work for me. It seems like people kind of treat it like second screen content. I just really don't like that content blob type of thing. The core combat of the game is actually pretty good. It's sort of a Souls-like combat. It expands upon what they did in Origins, with the special abilities like the Spartan Kick and Arrow Volley and that stuff. But considering the game is 80 hours long, the combat does get boring. One of the main things is poor enemy variety. There's only like 3 types of enemies, and there's like dude, tough dude, and big tough dude, There are actually some decent like boss fights. They're not like as good as like Dark Souls or anything, but they're still fairly good. But the common enemies aren't very good. The stealth here is probably the lowest point in the series. The areas don't feel designed for it. The climbing is also not great, and most of the cities only have like 1-2-story buildings. I don't like this version of the ship combat. It just doesn't control as smoothly as it did in AC4, and the arrows don't have the same impact as cannons, and there's basically no waves, which maybe that's geographically accurate, but not very fun. The exploration has the same level gating problem as Origins, but worse. They put high level areas next to the starting areas, and it makes it feel like a false open world. The loot is really bad. It's just make the numbers go up, and there's only about 5 weapon types and no subtypes. They added in a dialogue system, but I really don't care for it. It's just like either yes, no, or ask a bunch of uninteresting questions. Some of those are used for like the exploration mode, which doesn't have UI markers, but still. The overarching story is okay, with the journey to discover your family and the problems they have. But the sub-arcs are really bad. It's always find some unrememberable friend who lives in some town, but there's some generic bad guy who's oppressing the people in some way. You do like 5 missions, kill the bad guy, rinse and repeat about 100 times. And there is the kind of interesting jump the shark elements of all the mythological creatures and stuff. And they added more complexity back into the modern day stuff. There's only a handful of memorable characters. People seem to like Cassandra / Alexios, but I kind of find them a bit generic. Just sort of like a lesser Greek Ezio. The aesthetics are really nice at first. There's good looking landscapes, but there's only about 3 to 4 different types of landscapes, and by the end of the game you'll be sick of them. And I give AC Odyssey a 6.94. Next we have Valhalla. Valhalla is a bit of a step up from Odyssey, but not much. The combat's pretty well the same, but with some decent new abilities, and with a fairly decent skills / upgrade system. The loot's better. There's not much more weapon types, but there is less of it, so you don't have to change your weapons every hour. The enemy variety is still bad. The boss fights are still fairly good. The climbing's a bit better, there's more big cities, and there's also more stealth, even like places where you have to be in stealth because everyone's hunting you. The main thing that's better is the sub-arc stories. It feels less like the same save the town from generic bad guy over and over again. It does usually revolve around trying to get someone to become your ally, but it's in different ways. Sometimes they want help in a military campaign, sometimes they want to find a traitor, sometimes it's trying to make peace between two groups. A lot less save the town. The overarching plot is also alright, but it has a very dour ending. It almost feels like the writers are mad at you for completing the game. Another thing is that the game is constantly flip-flopping on whether or not the English Viking conflicts was a morally gray or black and white. It's probably a lot to do with that there was probably like 20 writers working on this. Also, it's trying to say the Vikings were peaceful people, but then like the first time you go to England, you immediately go raid some random people's camp just because you need supplies. Also, a common thing in raids is burning down the village. Eivor is a decent main character, but can come off as kind of emo. The environments aren't as nice as Odyssey, but still decent. But there is a fair bit more environmental variety, so overall it's actually kind of better. I'm giving AC Valhalla a 7.10. Now you have AC Chronicles. The gameplay of AC Chronicles may be a not so great 2D translation of PAC gameplay, or apparently a lesser version of Mark of the Ninja, but at least it's short. The China and India stories are decent, if a bit standard. AC Fight the Oppressor stories. The Russia one was a bit more interesting, where you had the main guy was an assassin but had conflict with the other assassins, which was interesting. And the more stylized art styles are also fairly good, especially the Russian one. I'll give AC Chronicles a 7.21. Next we have AC1. Now AC1 did start everything and does have a bit of depth, but it does ultimately feel like a prototype for the series. Stealth, climbing, fighting are all pretty simple, and the only weapons you have are your sword and the throwing knives. You can also be pretty well invincible while fighting by just spamming parry. The story's okay with a bit of character building for Altair and the main villain, but it ultimately boils down to kill 10 guys, then kill the final boss. The Mideastern setting is one of the better settings, which is probably why it was one of the first ones they went back to with Mirage. So I'm going to give AC1 a 7.53. Next we have AC Nexus. This is a fairly good replication of the AC experience into VR, but it does have some flaws. Gameplay gets kind of repetitive over time. Luckily this game's relatively short. It's oversimplified, and you could say, well, Batman Arkham Shadow is a simplified version of the Arkham games, but Arkham Shadow has more move variety and enemy variety and a better sense of progression. Melee combat is slow and sort of feels like those old-timey movie sword fights where they just strike left, right over and over. Maybe I should have turned up the difficulty, but I don't know if that actually increases attack speeds. Overall, it's not terrible, but not great either. The tools/gadgets, being the bow, throwing knife, and smoke bombs, all feel fairly good, but I wish there was more variety. It also would have been good if you got more gadgets as the game goes on, because you get them all near the beginning of the game. It also would have been nice if there had been more tools specific to each character. The only thing now is that SEO gets the crossbow instead of a bow. That's it. Maybe Connor should have had a pistol instead of throwing knives, and it also would have been cool if he got the rope darts, or maybe Cassandra could have had some of her special moves like the Spartan kick. Overall, it would have been nice if they took the more unique gameplay mechanics from each game that they're being inspired from. Also, the auto lock for knives and bows can go a bit crazy sometimes. and choose the completely wrong target. Stealth is good and feels like it should. It pretty much feels like the stealth from the regular games, which is good. Climbing is kind of a mixed bag. The vertical grabbing ledges and moving upward is mostly fine, but pulling yourself onto a ledge, especially on ladders, can be kind of finicky, which is kind of ironic because it should be easier on ladders. Jumping between things can feel really good, but when you want to jump to a ledge that's higher than the place you are now, it can be a bit annoying. I think the main thing is it wants you to look above the ledge and not at the ledge. This is really bad when you're close because you basically can't jump onto a ledge when you're close. Also, it's kind of annoying that you can't jump over waist-high ledges. Despite it being that way in the regular game, I think they want you to use your hands, but that makes it not feel like the regular game. There's a decent number of different types of enemies, but at the same time, the different types of enemies don't feel that different. The bosses aren't great. They're basically just regular enemies with more health. The story is pretty basic, but it is cool to have a collection of characters this time from the older stuff, which is something they should really capitalize on. Like, they already have an Avengers logo, why not do a game that goes across time? Anyway. Also, the modern day stuff was done just a bit better here. Aesthetically, it's cool to see colonial New England and Venice up close. I wasn't that big a fan of the Greek cities, but if you are, I'm sure you'll like it. I'm giving Assassin's Creed Nexus a 7.73. Next, we have AC Mirage. Mirage tries to replicate the glory days of Assassin's Creed, but it's stuck within the RPG games' framework. The game being an expanded upon DLC, it feels like someone tried to mod the new games to feel like the old games. Stealth is re-emphasized as the primary playstyle and is relatively good. Combat has been re-simplified, but putting the old style combat onto the system meant for the new style combat makes it lose a lot of fluidity. The level design brought back a lot of the verticality for stealth and climbing, which was good. Story-wise, it is kind of another standard EC revenge plot, but Bastion's a decent character, and there are some decent side characters. The aesthetics are pretty good. Baghdad is a nice looking city, but it is kind of similar to the stuff we've seen before. That you could kind of say that about the entire game. It doesn't reinvigorate the series. It just kind of gets rid of RPG stuff and adds back a lot of the old stuff and resets everything to zero. That being said, the game not being 100 hours long is pretty good in my opinion. I'm giving Assassin's Creed Mirage a 7.81. Next we have Revelations. Revelations is ultimately alright, but it did have to follow up Brotherhood, which is one of the very best Assassin's Creeds. Gameplay wise, it didn't really build upon Brotherhood too much, and a lot of what it did wasn't great. The zip lines were fun, but other than that, the tower defense sections weren't great, and the grenade crafting system was very uninteresting. The story is actually fairly good. The main conflict is kind of more the same, but what we get with how it wraps up Ezio's story and character arc is fairly good, and it also wraps up Altair's story, and it gives the two characters a bit of a connection. Also, it was kind of fun how, since the only gadget Altair had, when you play his section, he gets like unlimited throwing knives, which was fun. I'm giving Revelations a 7.94. Next, we have Assassin's Creed Liberation. I did play this via the AC3 Remaster. It's sort of bundled in there, and I got that on PS Plus. This game is sort of like AC Rogue in that it's building upon the last game. AC Rogue was connected to AC4. This game's connected to AC3. And I mean that gameplay wise. It's a sort of more the same sequel for AC3. Like AC3, the climbing, combat, and stealth are all fairly good. There's also some new stuff like the whip, which you can use to pull enemies toward you, and sometimes do an Indiana Jones whip swing. The story is a fairly standard AC story with fighting oppressors and covering bad guys and all that. Adeline herself, though, stands out for actually being one of the better main character assassins, despite being from a PSP game originally. You get a sense that she's a real genuine and caring person. A lot of this isn't from the writing, but the voice actor's performance. The aesthetics for New Orleans and Mexico are fairly good. The swamps aren't great, though. Fidelity-wise, it's not very good. Probably a lot to do with it being upscaled to the big screen. There's like this one really bad looking ice wall in a mission where you go meet Connor. Also, some of the non-main character voice work is kind of off, and there's like one guy that sounds like Kermit the Frog. So anyway, I'm going to give AC Liberation an 8.01. Next we have AC Unity. AC Unity was looked upon as a series low at that point, but now I personally see it as a series mid. I remember the combat in the game was a bit worse than the previous entries. Outside the dodging, that was kind of fun. The stealth was good and introduced the opportunity system. I hear a lot of people say they really like the parkour in this game. And I know this is probably going to get a lot of people mad, but I personally don't see a big difference between most of the parkour systems throughout the Assassin's Creed series. I think map/level design was fairly good. I really like how this was the first AC game with a lot of buildings that you could go inside and run through. There was also the time travel missions that were fun. That was an interesting thing. I don't remember the story being that great. I found Arno a kind of mediocre character. The aesthetics are fairly good with the grimy gothic Paris. And of course there was obviously the big technical problems at launch, and I don't know if those ever got patched, or maybe things run better on newer systems. I played on launch, and I didn't actually run into that many bugs. I did have the occasional frame rate issue though, although actually the co-op, which was decent, was pretty buggy. And overall I'm going to give Unity an 8.05. Next we have Assassin's Creed Rogue. It's a fairly good yet fairly derivative game. The gameplay is nearly exactly the same as it was in Black Flag, outside of a few different gadgets and ship weapons. That being said, AC4 has some of the very best gameplay in the series, so at least they're stealing from something that's pretty good. The story has an interesting idea of an assassin turning Templar. The problem is, it's more based around, say, being against the assassins than for the Templars. He doesn't really have a good motivation to join the Templars. He could have gone up against the assassins himself or got help from somebody else, and they really could have had an interesting breakdown of the core dynamic of the series, that being freedom versus security. It's just not explored very well. With all that said, there is some fun things that bridges this game to the other games. There are connections to AC4, 3, and Unity, which is interesting. The aesthetics for this game are fairly good, especially the Arctic stuff, and revisiting New York. I'm gonna give Rogue an 8.11. Next we have AC3. AC3 is the most underrated Assassin's Creed game. It had the misfortune of following the Ezio trilogy, but in retrospect, it's better than a lot of the games in the series. The gameplay is pretty good. I remember it being the most fluid version of the original system, and the stealth was good as ever. There were some fun mechanics like the rope dart and using human shields. There was also like the prototype version of ship combat and the ship missions. The level design was fairly good. It was impressive how they made the smaller buildings and trees work. The story was decent. Connor is alright as a main character. He is angry a lot, but it doesn't really feel like unjust or whiny necessarily. Spoilers real quick, I guess. Haven is probably the most memorable and best AC antagonist to me. I'm personally really into the American Revolution stuff, so this is my favorite setting for the series, and people were really mad about how Desmond's modern day plot ended. which I definitely can see. But I think people are going to get kind of mad at me about this, but personally, I just never really cared too much about the modern day stuff in Assassin's Creed anyway, so it didn't really get to me that much. One thing I'll say is there actually was better gameplay in the modern day stuff, which was good. The aesthetics are really good, and this is one of the better looking AC games. I'm going to give AC3 a 8.61. As much as I don't care for the RPG Assassin's Creeds, I do think AC Origins was a really good start. The gameplay was fairly good, with the new combat system and the ability to climb pretty much anything. A lot of the problems with the later RPGs, like bad loot and level gating, weren't nearly as bad. The combat felt really good. The bow and arrow stuff was really well done, making projectiles a more core part of the combat. Unfortunately, stealth did start to take a backseat during this game. There was also those boat sections with Aya, which was actually probably one of the better versions of the ancient times boats. Level design wise, in an overall sense, Egypt is probably the best map in the series. It's cool how the Nile takes you through the variety of locations. When it comes to story, the plot is another simple AC revenge plot, but Bayek and Aya are pretty good characters. That being said, I don't quite remember why, but I do remember the third act, story and gameplay wise, going downhill a fair bit. Layla giving the series a modern day plot again was okay, but didn't really have that much an impact. Aesthetically, this might be the best looking AC, with a lot of variety in its environments that all look really good. I'm giving Origins a 8.82. With AC1 sort of feeling like a prototype, AC2 feels like the first real Assassin's Creed game. It originated so much of what the series would be known for. The combat had more options and played more fluidly, and they introduced a wide variety of gadgets. The design of the cities were also more parkour friendly. The game being broken into many small open worlds was unique and worked well. The stealth was better, adding things like the double and air assassinations. Whatever happened to the double assassinations anyway? There was also some more cinematic gameplay sections. I miss that sort of stuff from games of this era. There is more gameplay variety. The story's fairly good, even though it's a bit soured because pretty much every other AC would copy it in some way. This game introduced Enzio. Although I don't like him quite as much as everyone else seems to, you can definitely see why he stands out so much more than the other assassins in the public eye. He's cool, charismatic, and likable, and perseveres through a lot of turmoil as a character. And even though I say I don't care that much for the modern day plot, the little twist moment at the end of this game was really cool. The aesthetics are very nice, and they well present the nice looking Italian architecture. To this day, Renaissance Italy is a really unique and interesting setting, and it was even more interesting back then in an era that was dominated by modern military shooters. So I really liked that. I'm giving AC2 a 9.01. Next we have AC Brotherhood. Although this game wasn't as big a jump forward as AC2, I remember liking it a fair bit more, and what they did improve on was good. The main thing I remember liking was the open world. Being one big map for the first time was really good. The many smaller open worlds of AC2 were also good, but this works just a bit better. Story-wise, this is probably the weakest of the Ezio trilogy. Because I remember the least about it, it kind of repeats AC2. This time it's Vengeance for Your Uncle. There was some good stuff. We did get to see Ezio reform the Brotherhood and become the master assassin we know him as, which was good. I remember Rome being fairly good aesthetically, but not great though. I'm giving Brotherhood a 9.10. Next we have AC4. This game is considered legendary for a reason. The melee combat is some of the better AC combat. The game finally introduced free aim for guns, which was really nice. It gave you a bit more options. Also, it was kind of fun that you had 4 guns, and the close range version of the 4 guns, you would do sort of like a gun kata moves. Of course, the real reason this game is beloved is the ship. The ship combat is great, with using a wide variety of weapons while aiming your cannons over the high waves. This combat has never been replicated outside of Rogue, which just sort of copy pasted it. I don't know if it just doesn't work because it's ancient times, but they should have found a better way to try to revive the ship combat in Odyssey. And to add to the ship combat in AC4, you get to board ships, which is super fun and very piratey. You can use the rope swing to get out onto the next ship. The ship is also good for exploration. Being able to seamlessly go on foot anywhere that isn't a major city, it's real fun. This is a great Assassin's Creed map. The side objectives are spread all across the islands, and it feels really well made. The story isn't near as good as the gameplay, and is kind of mediocre. Some people like Edward, but I personally find him kind of mediocre. I do like that he doesn't have the standard revenge plot as his origin, which is good. This is also the start of the period in which AC sort of abandoned the modern day plotline. And even though, again, I didn't really care for it that much, it feels kind of weird to almost completely abandon it. The aesthetics are up there with all that nice Caribbean nature on the islands and Spanish architecture. I'm giving AC4 a 9.26. Now, next we have a number 1, and I feel like this is going to make a lot of people mad, and they were just sort of hoping I forgot about it. But next we have Assassin's Creed Syndicate. I really like this game. I know that in a lot of ways, you could definitely call this game the least Assassin's Creed game, at least at the time. A lot of the gameplay systems and story tones were changed. Some people have called it Victorian GTA, but to be honest, I really like the idea of Victorian GTA. People have said that combat switching to a sort of free-flow Arkham-esque combat made it too simple, but I don't really think that. Like, I didn't think what came before was that much more complex. I think it feels fine. I like that they brought back free aim, which was gone in AC Unity for some reason. I think with semi-auto firearms that it was good to give you another combat option. I also like the vehicles. The carriage chases were fun. You could even like drift on the carriage, which is a bit silly, but felt really fun. Being able to jump on in between the carriages and have fights while the carriages were moving was really fun. In terms of vehicles, there was also jumping between the boats on the Thames and heisting trains. That was also fun. There was just a lot to do in this game. Stealth was pretty good, with a lot of verticality and probably the best implementation of the opportunities system. The grappling hook did cut out a lot of the parkour, but it was still fun to zip around like Batman. When it comes to the story, I can see how on the surface the more marvelly quippy dialogue could have turned some people off, but I think overall the story is fairly good. I'm not going to pretend it's a masterpiece. I know people dislike the Fry twins, especially Jacob, but I do think they work well together. They work as two sides of the same coin, Evie being cold and calculating, and Jacob being foolhardy and impulsive. And they're not one note about it. Jacob and Evie have moments of seeing their own flaws in the way they do things. They also kind of work as a mirror for the two type of assassins the series has, where it's usually either the serious Altair type or the fun goofy Ezio type. The aesthetics are pretty good, with the grimy back galleries and ornate landmark architecture. Victorian London is definitely a top tier AC setting. There was also the extended secret World War One section that was pretty good. I'm giving Syndicate a 9.34. Overall, the series has a lot of highs and lows. It's fun action and adventure, and is a good trek through time. Thank you to anyone who likes, comments, or subscribes. That's it.